to thank Clarion for hosting this session. We approached them and it seemed to be a really good idea. And fortunately they agreed. Our panel today is Stuart Hoegner, who's Gaming Counsel PC of Canada. Stu's done a lot of work in the Bitcoin area and was well versed in it long before I ever heard of it. Michael Ellen, who's the Director of Licensing and Strategy for Alderney, a leading gaming regulatory body, and someone who's very active in the iGaming space, and has been a very innovative regulatory authority, and we're very pleased to have him here to give us the perspectives of the regulators on what is likely to be an emerging technology. And Steve Beauregard is with GoCoin, which is a payment processor which is active in the Bitcoin space with gaming and really provides some services that seem essential to adoption of Bitcoin technology for the gaming space itself, and is very well versed in how to address what I would call the boogeyman of price volatility and why that really should not keep you from adopting Bitcoin for your gaming operation. Basically, we're here to talk about the iGaming issues and the application of Bitcoin technology. John is a very knowledgeable guy. He did a wonderful paper, by the way, on all the advantages of using Bitcoin. But let me just reiterate, we've got pretty much no chargebacks, irreversible transactions, which is an attribute that's good. We have low transaction costs, which translate more to more than just simply lowering your operating costs, but also would allow you to turn iGaming into what we call a long tail, where you can handle microgaming transactions on a cost-effective basis that's not currently possible given the transaction costs for using your traditional gaming processor.
We require the licensee to accept funds only from the registered player or from the approved associate. Just the two options. We require the licensee to hold the player funds at all times in a bank account. That's what the regulations say. Although this can be circumvented by an adequate guarantee. So that door isn't tight shut, but it sure isn't open. We permit the licensee no recourse to the player funds, which I think was a point that was made earlier. So funds require segregation. And we require the key point for me in this debate is that we require the licensee to be adequately assured under AML requirements that funds are received from and repaid to only the registered customer. Now that works really well with a credit card. One of the things a credit card is good at is that, in respect of its transactions, and undertake due diligence, etc., under our AML laws. Now our AML laws are pretty much the same as everyone else's. They're driven down from the FATF. Additional to our regulations, we have guidelines. So if you want an Alderney license, your operating procedures have to be approved by us before you start. And we've set out guidelines to show you the sort of thing we might accept in terms of the proper control of your operation. And those guidelines say that your payment provider needs to be regulated. You must use a payment provider, it needs to be regulated, if you're not using the associate mechanism I described earlier. The approval of the payment provider will be by the local, in that jurisdiction, financial regulatory authority, most normally. I'm sort of stumbling on. I've got some Bitcoin-specific issues. Shall I keep going, or do you want me to
No, we have responses for these.
Excellent, good. I'm pleased to hear it, because I don't want to be the Dr. Death here. Clearly, Bitcoin fails under the cash prohibition, but additionally, it doesn't offer the fiat currency store of value that we look for in the capitalization of the entity. So it's like a sort of double whammy. It's not only not cash, it's not as good as cash in that respect. It's outside the banking system, which gives us a bottomless problems in terms of identifying the source of funds. And there are some risk exposures on the conversion process of Bitcoins into something we would accept that will impact on the capitalization requirements of the licensee. I've got 5 of these, so bear with me. That's only number 1. Number 2, it's got uncertain legality nationally across the world. So prospectively, it's subject to prohibition. Some nation will stand up and say, you may not. And how will that impact we're a .com jurisdiction, so our licensees' funds do not have to be with us. They can be anywhere that we've approved of. So if the XYZ state says no to Bitcoin, what does that do for our licensee? It's got uncertain assurance from malware, from mining process, corruption. These are subjects which I'm not an expert on, these guys are, but no doubt they will go into why these are not negatives in terms of the store of value. And there are some non-instant settlement issues. Clearly the major issue is under the Financial Action Task Force rules for the due diligence on the source of funds. I don't think you want to hear me on the advantages because these guys are better at it than I am. But the last sort of stone I'd throw into this pond is the Payment Services Directive in the European Union, on which I am not an expert. I'm just a meager gambling regulator, but I think that comes in next year, and I think it requires every paying agent to be approved or exempted locally, and therefore passported across the European Union, and I think it applies only to European Union currencies.
Cash is sometimes king. However, you cannot walk into a casino without any cash in your pocket. But when you come in there, there's an ATM machine that's sitting in the corner, and you can go and you can take your ATM card, and you can go and you get cash, and then you can go gamble with it. Nobody worries about source of funds. Basically, the casino, which you place a machine there, doesn't know whether you robbed a liquor store and put the money into your bank account that you're coming in there and basically do your gambling. There are mechanisms that are applied which basically focus on transaction limits. What I would like to have a dialogue with the regulators on is whether or not that sort of a transaction limit approach, coupled with the same sort of know your customer rules that you have for any other payment provider or for any other payment method, might suffice to address the question of cash being prohibited. I mean, currently prepaid debit cards are allowed for iGaming purposes in many jurisdictions. Some jurisdictions say no cash, but if you deal with a payment provider that is authorized to take deposits in another jurisdiction and has KYC rules for accepting those deposits, that will be suffice. What I'm trying to get to is that there will be a competition among jurisdictions to host this sort of a business, and I'm hoping that we will be able to foster an understanding that the current rules that are in place for KYC perhaps will be extended to the payment processors, and perhaps even the payment processors, because of Bitcoin technology, can alleviate your concerns for things like the capitalization of an operator. If an operator has no access to player funds, then it doesn't enter into their capitalization. Basically, they have to run their operation, they earn the revenue. If you have a Bitcoin payment provider who has an ability to segregate player funds from the operator and release them only as earned or as players cash out, that might alleviate that concern. The other concern is eventually we will see casinos being run, which will be an entirely Bitcoin environment, which will address the idea that there's a price volatility concern also. But I'm just moderate. I hope that rose to the challenge a bit, but I'd like to defer to Stuart, who has a very good background on the legal issues that we're involved with, basically acceptance of Bitcoin as deposits. Stu, you want to comment?
I feel bad. Did everyone hear me? I feel bad. We shouldn't be taking this beating up on poor Michael. But that said, I've been on panels where I've been the one being beaten up because I've been sticking up for Bitcoin, so I guess all's fair. I think that all of the things that Michael mentioned can be addressed in a Bitcoin environment, whether it be Bitcoin in fiat play or Bitcoin in, Bitcoin out, and Bitcoin denominated in the gaming environment. Save and except for no cash, the comparison, allegedly no cash, and the bank account rule. And I think the cash to Bitcoin comparison can be useful in learning about Bitcoin, specifically talking about things like fungibility, but it's been overwrought. They are two very, very different things. And when cash approaches the point where you have a transparent ledger showing every every serial number of every banknote traded in the world and can view that on the internet, then you're getting close to an all-force comparison between Bitcoin and cash. Until then, I don't really think it's there. So I don't think, my own view is, it's not good enough at this point to say the rule says this. We have to think about why the rule is in place and how it should be used to address Bitcoin, if it can be used to address Bitcoin, and acknowledge that Bitcoin is really sui generis, and we should start to come up with some other rules that responsibly address this. I guess I'd also just add that the FATF has not ruled out Bitcoin. They haven't spoken about it. They have a specific rule in the 40 recommendations dealing with new technologies, saying that you have to think carefully about, essentially think carefully about how these fit into current CDD, KYC, and CTF AML requirements and environments. And I think that's just responsible. And I think that with a little creativity, we'll probably get there.
Stu, can you just elaborate a little bit about the Canadian experience and the approach taken in Canada, which is what I would say is fairly pro-Bitcoin?
It's kind of a muddle. I think in Canada we're going to have a lot of, I suspect at some point we're going to have some decisions to make because we don't have the situation that we do in the United States where most Bitcoin exchanges have been regulated as money transmitters and MSBs. We don't do that in Canada. So the Bitcoin Foundation had a really good case to make before Congress late last year. They said, we've got these MSB rules. FinCEN was on side, saying we think that the current regime is adequate. The DOJ, my reading of it, I'll defer to the Americans on the panel, my reading of it was that they agreed. We don't have that situation in Canada, so we might come to a point soon where we've got to decide if we want to keep the status quo, which is fairly light in terms of that FIU regulation, the Financial Intelligence Unit regulation component of it, or if we're going to try to get a regime that we can live with. That's maybe not as good as we have now, but that is something that we can live with going forward. I guess I would also just add that in Canada, it's not the case that Bitcoin's not regulated. The Bitcoin as a protocol probably is not regulable, but the people and things in Bitcoin are regulated right now, are currently regulated, and will be regulated in the future. That's the case with securities, that's the case with paying your taxes, that's going to be the case in gaming down the line.
I tend to agree with Stuart in terms of all of the problems that Michael has brought up are all solvable. And I think it's also going to be a step-by-step process to get to solve all those problems, some through technology and some through education. So I think to speak to Bitcoin being inferior to cash, I would actually argue the opposite. It's superior in every manner. It does absolutely everything that cash does, only better. It acts better from the standpoint of giving a record of where the money has been. To me, it should be a regulator's dream. The fact that you have this public ledger now where you can trace these transactions and permanently cement into the blockchain a transaction and be able to see what address it came from and went to. Now, granted, today the ability to track that address through to the individual's wallet is difficult, but certainly solvable, and that's going to be solved by a number of things. In particular, what we've been doing at GoCoin is building a vertical solution with KYC built into it, so that when somebody comes and brings Bitcoin in and they want to make a purchase, that we can actually go through a process and lead them down a path of, okay, answer these questions. And one of the big trends in KYC is towards social KYC. So tapping into their Facebook, into their Twitter, into their LinkedIn, into the various places where they're transacting, even the Google authentication. So these things can reinforce who the individual is. In terms of regulations and some of the requirements with banking, that's one of the things that we do also is by taking the Bitcoin in and converting it instantly to cash, and then that can then be deposited into a bank. That I think that in the future of iGaming, this should be the currency of choice. It has every advantage, and in fact, it eliminates a lot of the fraud, and all of the fraud. And the way I see it, all of those expenses that are inside of that transaction right now with credit cards and other methods of getting the money in, a lot of them just completely go away. So there's a lot of hidden savings.
Yeah, thank you. Michael, we don't all mean to be a company, so Yeah, reactions to the proffered solutions here?
Well, yes, this is sort of extempore, making it up as I go along. I think if this were a debate, my case rests on the Financial Action Task Force ability to react positively to Bitcoin. I have some experience from an inspection by the IMF of my jurisdiction recently, when for those of you that aren't familiar, the Financial Action Task Force sets the anti-money laundering rules for the civilized world. And they have, I forget how many, is it 41 plus 6 principles?
It's been distilled down to the original 40 now.
Excellent, terrific. One of them says that you should take note of new technology. The principles that we were inspecting under were written in 2002. The inspectors came, I don't want to show any prejudice here, but they came from Canada and the United States. And they weren't pleased to be investigating an e-gambling jurisdiction. They thought we were evil before they started. Between us, just these 4 weeks. They refused to acknowledge the relevance of online verification in our industry. They said that we should require our licensees to obtain copies of documentation that proved their address and their personal details, because online verification was not adequate. Now, my case rests on that single fact, that's just 10 years out of time. So is it realistic to expect them to catch up with Bitcoin?
From the gaming perspective, you're the gaming regulator. Obviously, you have to worry about what financial regulators will or will not do. Clearly, that's part of the mission. But from the gaming perspective, what's the cost to the regulated gaming industry and to those jurisdictions which protect players if nothing is done? Does anyone in this room think that the unregulated industry is going to sit back and simply say, well, Bitcoin, yeah, it's great, it's wonderful, irreversible transactions, low costs. No, we won't do it. No, I think you're going to see competition for any regulated gaming company from the unregulated industry if we cannot find a way to accommodate these concerns, but I'm still hopeful that we can.
Yeah, sorry, just to stay with that, the political reality is that no matter what the competition does, if the IMF report on my jurisdiction is hostile, my politicians will respond. They can only support FATF principles. So absent FATF principles, it doesn't really matter if we're dying in the water as a jurisdiction.